Under the cover of twilight, the shack behind the feed store reeked of sweat, kerosene, and silence that had been bought too cheap. Eliza Fairborn's words were not whispered in fear, but flung like a blade into the storm-soaked night. Rain battered. Her face soaked her riding cloak and blurred the moonlight into silver streaks. But she did not slow her horse. The pine-lined ridges of the Arkansas frontier rose like jagged teeth around her. Each gust of wind was a warning, each lightning flash a reminder she was no longer in Boston. She gripped the reins tighter, her heart slamming against her ribs like a trapped bird. Her fingers were raw from holding on, and her once elegant riding boots were caked in mud. Behind her, hooves thundered. 3 men giving chase, hired by Edmund Blackston, her would-be husband, a mining tycoon twice her age with cold black eyes, and a voice like gravel. They would drag her back, say it was for her family's salvation, her father's debts, her mother's tears. But none of that mattered now. Eliza was not a debt to be traded. She was not livestock to be bought with promises of comfort and control. She was 22, sharp-minded, and alive with a fire she had not known she possessed. Until now, a flash of lightning tore the sky open. She saw them then. 3 riders, dark silhouettes cresting the hill behind her. Close, too close, faster. Glory, she whispered to the mare, urging the creature on. Just a little further. But the trail was slick. Rocks hidden under fallen needles shifted beneath the hooves. As she turned toward a wooded ravine, a sharp crack sounded. Glory stumbled. Eliza screamed as the world tilted. She hit the ground hard, pain bursting through her side. The wind was knocked from her lungs. She tried to rise, but her leg throbbed, pinned awkwardly beneath her. The mare whinnied and bolted riderless into the forest. The sound of hooves grew louder. "No!" she gasped, clawing at the earth, dragging herself toward the shelter of the trees. Her velvet cloak snagged on a root. She ripped it free. Mud caked her palms. Her breaths came shallow, panicked, then a whistle, sharp, unnatural. A second later, a scream, not hers, a man's cut short. She turned. One of the riders had fallen, his horse collapsing beside him. An arrow protruded from its neck. The other. 2 pulled up, startled, eyes scanning the darkness. "Who's there?" one called. Another arrow flew, this one embedded into the tree beside the man's head. He turned tail, spurring his horse into retreat. The third followed without a word. Eliza's breath trembled, her body quivered with shock. A figure emerged from the shadows, stepping lightly through the rain-slick brush, tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a weather-worn buckskin coat, a bow slung over his shoulder. His hair was raven dark, braided and tied with a simple strip of leather. His face, half-shadowed, was unreadable, but his eyes were steady and fierce. He crouched beside her. "You are hurt." His voice was low, careful. Eliza nodded numbly, unsure if she was seeing a vision or a ghost. The pain in her leg assured her she was not dreaming. "Who are you?" she rasped. The man did not answer right away. He glanced toward the trees, listening for more riders. Then he looked back at her. "I do not know who you are," he said, "but I know the eyes of someone who does not want to be claimed." His words struck her deeper than any wound. Something in them, truth, understanding, defiance, matched the scream still echoing in her chest. He reached out a hand. "Can you stand?" With his help, she rose unsteadily. Her ankle throbbed, but it held. He guided her arm over his shoulder, steady as a stone. "My name is Wire," he said, leading her toward a narrow path deeper into the forest. "My people once hunted here before the soldiers pushed us west." Eliza blinked at him, the world tilting with exhaustion and disbelief. "I am Eliza Fairborn," she managed, "from Massachusetts." "You ran far," Wire said simply. Then, after a pause, "You will not be safe alone tonight. Come." As they disappeared into the trees, the storm closed behind them like a curtain. Eliza did not know where he was taking her or what waited at the end of this path, but she knew this. Something wild had shifted in her, something that would never again fit into corsets and contracts, and for the first time in her life, she did not look back. Eliza woke to the creak of timber and wind. The storm had passed, but the scent of wet earth and pine still hung thick in the air, like a memory the forest was unwilling to release. Somewhere beyond the walls, a bird called once, then fell silent. She blinked against the soft golden light of dawn, filtering through a thin hide stretched across a low window. The world outside was hushed, reverent, as if it too was recovering. Her limbs ached with the deep soreness of survival, but the sharpness in her ankle had dulled to a manageable throb. She shifted beneath a blanket of woven wool, warm and coarse, smelling faintly of smoke and sage. Her gaze drifted across the room. Her boots and torn riding cloak lay folded near the fire, now reduced to glowing embers, pulsing like the quiet heartbeat of the cabin. She was in a small, single-room lodge, wooden walls chinked with moss and clay, the low roof sheltering them from the world. The space was humble but solid, safe. Everything inside bore the touch of quiet care. Bundles of herbs hung drying above the hearth. A clay pot steamed gently in the corner, and beside her bed lay a basin of fresh water with a clean cloth folded neatly on its edge. Then she saw him. Wire sat on a stool near the fire, sharpening a blade with methodical, deliberate strokes. His movements were precise, not rushed, his hands steady as water flowing over stone. He wore no uniform, no badge, no rings on his fingers, just a worn buckskin coat, boots laced with sinew, and eyes that had seen the world without ever being consumed by it. He had not noticed her waking, or if he had, he gave no sign. The only sound was the rhythmic slide of steel on stone. Eliza swallowed, her throat dry. "Why?" Her voice broke the hush, hoarse from disuse, cracking like an old floorboard. Wire glanced up. The firelight traced the hard angles of his cheekbones, casting shadows into the hollow of his collarbone. His expression did not change. He simply set the blade aside and met her gaze, calm and unflinching. "Why did you help me?" she pressed, forcing herself upright despite the dull protest in her side. "What do you want in return? Gratitude? Gold? Or just the pleasure of having a helpless woman owe you something?" He stood, not with offense, nor with pride. He just stood tall, grounded, unmoved by her challenge. "I do not want anything," he said simply. She narrowed her eyes. "You expect me to believe that?" Wire walked over, crouching beside her, not too close, just enough that she could see the object in his palm. He moved slowly, respectfully, no threat in his posture, no demand in his gaze. He placed something gently on the folded blanket near her hand. A carved horse, tiny, delicate, its legs bent mid-gallop, mane flowing back like flame in wind, etched with astonishing precision from a single piece of cedar. She stared at it, momentarily dumbstruck. "I make them when I wait," he said, his voice softer now. "This one is yours. No debt." Eliza's fingers trembled as they hovered over the figure, then touched it. The wood was warm from his skin, smooth where his hands had shaped it. She looked up at him again, the sharp edges of her suspicion beginning to falter. "Then why?" she whispered. Wise sat back on his heels, eyes never leaving hers. "I save life where I can," he said, "but I do not keep what is not mine." It silenced her more thoroughly than any insult ever could. In Boston, every glance was measured. Every offer came with a hook. Her world had been one of smiles, with blades hidden behind them, ballrooms full of elegant wolves. She had been trained to navigate it, to charm and be charmed, to smile on cue and agree to terms she never set. But here, in this quiet cabin on the edge of nowhere, sat a man who said little, asked for nothing, and left small horses by bedsides without explanation. That night flashed through her mind, the arrow cutting the dark, the way he had held her. Upright as she limped through the trees, the steadiness of his grip. He had touched her only when needed, never more. He had not looked at her like Edmund Blackstone had, like a prize to be owned, nor like the masked gentlemen at masquerade balls who spoke poetry with their mouths while undressing her with their eyes. Wire had looked at her like a traveller might. Look at a storm, cautious, alert, but never trying to control it. Something inside her shifted. Not love, not yet, but a spark, the start of something rare, a crackling awareness that maybe for the first time in her life, a man had seen her not as a burden, a body, or a transaction. Just seen her and left a horse. The days passed like gentle shadows slipping between pine trunks and smoke trails. Eliza stayed in the lodge while her ankle healed, but she did not lie idle. She insisted on helping Wire, stirring the pots, grinding herbs, fetching water from the creek. The tasks were simple, but they steadied her, gave her hands something to do when her heart still flinched at distant hoofbeats. Wire never hovered. He worked beside her in silence, his presence calm as a still lake. And over time, the silence between them softened, turned into words. It began with food. "What's in this?" she asked one morning, lifting the lid of a clay pot. "Smells like something my family's cook would never dare serve," she said, her lip twitching. Wire gave the barest shadow of a smile. "Ground corn, smoked trout, wild onion. Your cook should have dared," Eliza chuckled. "She would have fainted at the sight of pine ash and bread." "Then she never lived hungry," he said. They sat by the fire that night, knees nearly touching. She peeled a root with care, then looked up. Her voice trembled, but she let it out. "I was promised to a man named Edmund Blackstone," she said. "He owns 5 coal mines, 4 rail cars, and the soul of every banker east of the Mississippi." Wire did not flinch. He just nodded once, like he had already guessed. "My father lost our shipping company. My mother thought a wedding would save our name and me. I was told I should be grateful to still be wanted." She looked down. "But the truth is, every night before the engagement ball, I prayed the train would derail, that I would wake up as someone else." Wire stirred the fire with a stick. "Sounds like a prison lined with lace." Eliza gave a bitter smile. "You have no idea." But Wire's gaze turned distant. "I do," he said, his voice like stone under rain. "My sister, Ayoka, she was 17. They tried to make her marry a man from the trading post. A white man, promised he would bring security, good safety for the winter." Eliza's breath caught. "She refused," he continued, his voice steady. "He did not take that well. The next time she went to gather berries, she never came home." Silence fell like snow. Eliza reached out instinctively, her hand grazing his. He did not pull away. "I'm sorry," she said. He gave a small nod, then turned his palm upward, letting her hand rest there for a moment. Warmth passed between them, not desire, not yet, but recognition. 2 souls marked by loss, by choices that left bruises. Later, as the wind howled against the lodge walls, Eliza stared at the small horse he had carved for her, now perched beside her bedroll. Her voice cracked the quiet. "I do not know who I am when I am not Eliza Fairborn, when I am not daughter to a failing dynasty or pawn in a business deal." Wire rose from his seat by the fire and crossed to her. He knelt again, not with reverence, but with certainty, his eyes dark and steady, locked with hers. "Then let me show you," he said. "Let me show you who you can be." The storm outside continued its lonely song, but inside the cabin something sacred took root. 2 people with no land to call home, no family who claimed them, no name that fit anymore. But maybe, just maybe, they could name each other, not with ownership but with belonging. The stream ran low that morning, murmuring softly over stone and root. Mist clung to the trees like breath that refused to fade, and the air carried the chill of late autumn. Eliza stood barefoot in the shallows, her hem damp, her fingers trembling as she unfolded the crumpled paper in her hands. The ink was smudged from travel, but the headline was still legible. "Here is Eliza Fairborn, present, dead body feared." Lost in river, she read the words twice, once with disbelief, once with release. According to the article, a blood-red cloak had been found snagged on a root near the southern bend of the Arkansas River. Her mare, Glory, had been seen running wild near the old Shawnee Trail. Nobody was recovered, but in the absence of answers, the town chose its own ending. Her parents had hosted a closed-casket funeral 3 days after. The obituary had praised her grace, her charitable heart, her unfortunate fragility. Her mother was quoted as saying she was too delicate for this world. There had been flowers, a piano quartet, and whispers that she had drowned herself rather than marry Edmund Blackstone. Eliza laughed. A short, bitter sound swallowed by the wind. She did not cry for the loss. She cried for the gift of it. Tears streamed down her face, not from grief, but from a strange, savage joy. She was free. She was gone. Eliza Fairborn had died in the eyes of society, and in her place stood a woman the world did not know. A woman who had outrun her own story. Behind, Wire stepped lightly over the mossy stones, carrying something in his hand. He said nothing, only approached with that same quiet certainty that had carried her from a thunderstorm into something like sanctuary. She turned to him, the newsprint still clenched in her fingers. "I am a ghost now," she whispered. "You are alive," he said. She watched him, her breath unsteady. The sun broke through the trees, shafts of gold, and for a moment the world was so still she thought it might never turn again. Then he held out his hand, and it was a necklace, simple, beautiful, a piece of red stone, polished smooth and set into braided leather. It shimmered in the light like a coal with a heartbeat. He didn't kneel. He didn't ask. He simply said, "My name is yours if you want it." No vows, no witnesses, no priest, only the truth between them. Eliza looked at the necklace, then at the man who had given her everything and asked for nothing. And without a word, she lifted her hair. Wire stepped forward, fastened the stone. At the nape of her neck, his fingers brushed her skin, not possessively but like someone who knew the value of touch when words failed. The stream whispered below. The trees stood guard, and Eliza Fairborn was no more, but the woman who stood in her place was very much alive. They came at dawn, 4 riders, silhouettes against the bruised sky, slipping through the pines like shadows with rifles. Edmund Blackstone had not given up after all. He had hired men not bound by laws, men who followed whispers, bootprints, and bribes. It had taken them weeks, but they had found the cabin. Wire saw the glint of metal from the ridge before the others crested the hill. He did not wake Eliza. He kissed her forehead and slipped out with bow and knife, vanishing into the woods like a ghost in buckskin. He meant to lead them away, but these men were no ordinary trackers. They split their search, 2 following Wire's footprints, the other circling wide toward the lodge. Eliza woke to silence. Too much silence. And then she heard it. A sharp cry, distant but real. "We're." She grabbed the rifle he had taught her to use. Her fingers trembled. Her breath came fast, but her eyes were clear. She had seen him lay traps, had walked the ridgelines, studied the wind, the pines, the shadows. He had taught her not because he thought she would need it, but because she had asked, and now it might save them both. She slipped out, moving low through the underbrush, her heart pounding like a war drum. The forest was no longer foreign. It was hers now too. She spotted the first man crouched behind a boulder, watching the clearing. He had a rifle aimed toward the path Wire would likely take returning home. She didn't think. She aimed. The shot cracked through the trees. The man dropped. Eliza gasped, lowered the rifle, and froze. Another man shouted, then another. She darted behind a fallen log as a bullet tore through bark above her. Her ears rang, and her hands stung from the recoil. But she stayed low, crawling toward the ravine, toward the place Wire had shown her, where the cliff dropped sharply, where a single wrong step meant a 100-foot fall. She reached the ridge in time to see Wire limping, blood staining his side still, leading two of them away. One pursuer had a revolver drawn, closing the distance fast. "Wire!" she screamed. He turned at the sound, eyes widening, not with fear, but with warning. The second man raised his pistol. Eliza ran. She did not think of corsets or contracts. She did not think of Boston ballrooms or the lace veil her mother had chosen for her wedding. She thought only of the man whose name she wore around her neck, the man who had saved her life and never once asked her to give it back. The man she loved. She flung herself forward just as the gun fired. Pain burst across her shoulder, white-hot and searing. She fell hard against Wire, knocking him down just as the bullet meant for him passed where his heart had been. Wire caught her before she hit the ground. His hands were everywhere, checking, cradling, shaking as he pressed them to the wound. "Eliza. No, no, stay with me." Her eyes fluttered open. "Still not the delicate one," she murmured, smiling through the tears. Behind them, the last man dropped his gun. Wire's blade was at his throat in seconds. He ran into the trees, into a world that would not shelter him. And then it was quiet. The wind carried only the scent of pine and gunpowder. The trees seemed to lean close, listening. Eliza lay in Wire's arms, blood soaking through her sleeve, but she was breathing, alive, and for the first time Wire did not stay silent. "You are not mine because I saved you," he whispered. "You are mine because you fought for me," she smiled faintly. "Told you I would rather die on the road than belong to anyone but myself." Wire pressed his forehead to hers. "You do not belong to anyone," he said. "But if you choose to stand with me, I will never let you stand alone." And from that moment on, neither of them ever did. Rain whispered against the mouth of the cave, a steady rhythm broken only by the distant roll of thunder. It was the kind of storm that didn't rage but lingered, grey and constant like grief that refused to shout but would not leave. Inside, the fire crackled low, casting flickering shadows on the stone walls, dancing like old ghosts trying to warm their bones. Eliza sat beside Wire, her knees tucked beneath her, dabbing gently at the wound on his ribs. The bullet had grazed him just below the bone, deep enough to bleed fiercely, shallow enough to spare his life. Still, the damage was real. She could see it in the paleness of his skin, the way sweat slicked his brow despite the cold. He hadn't made a sound when she cleaned it, not a curse, not even a hiss. But she read the pain in the tightness of his jaw, in the shallow breaths he tried to hide, in the slight twitch of his hand when the cloth passed too close to exposed flesh. They had found the cave just before nightfall, Wire half carrying her at first, then she half carrying him. Between them, they'd held each other upright. The path had vanished in mud, but the cave waited like a forgotten secret tucked into the cliffs. Now it held them like a womb carved of stone and time. Eliza tied off the final strip of cloth with shaking fingers. Then she leaned back, wrapping her arms around her knees. The firelight painted her face in hues of gold and sorrow. Her hair was still damp, curled wild at her shoulders. A bruise had bloomed across her temple from when she'd thrown herself in front of him. But her eyes, those remained unbroken. "What if they find us again?" she asked softly, her voice barely a ripple in the stillness. Wire's eyes opened. He turned his head slowly, as if it took effort but not reluctance. "Then they find ghosts," he said, "because the ones they look for no longer exist." Eliza gave a hollow laugh. "Ghosts still bleed." Wire reached out without hesitation, his hand finding hers. His fingers were warm despite the chill, calloused but gentle. He didn't grip, just held, enough to remind her she was not alone in this exile they had chosen. "You do not have to run anymore," he said. Her voice trembled. "And if they capture us?" Wyer's face did not flinch. "Then we do not let them." He wasn't boasting. There was no bravado in his tone, only certainty. His words were not forged in arrogance but in experience, in knowing how the world tried to take what was never freely given. Eliza turned to face him more fully, her breath uneven. Slowly, she placed her hand over his heart just above the bandage. She felt the beat, steady, stubborn. "I have you," she whispered, "and I will not lose that." Silence fell again. Not awkward, not cold, but heavy with the truth of what had passed between them. The kind of silence that holds 1,000 words unsaid, each one too fragile to voice aloud. She leaned her head against his shoulder, her cheek brushing the worn leather of his coat. He did not shift away. Instead, his head tipped gently until it rested against hers. "I never belonged to Boston," she murmured. "Not to lace, not to land, not to gold or names or deeds." Wyer's voice rumbled low beside her. "You belong to yourself," she nodded. "And I choose this. I choose you." Whatever comes, he did not answer with words. Instead, he reached for the knife at his belt, the one with the bone handle carved with symbols she had never asked him to explain. He unsheathed it slowly, then turned his palm upward and drew a shallow cut across the flesh. Blood welled, dark and real. Then he looked at her, waiting, not asking. Eliza took the blade without hesitation. Her cut was clean, confident. She pressed her palm to his, blood meeting blood, warm and human. They sat like that, firelight glinting off joined hands, their foreheads touching. There were no vows spoken, no dreams cast ahead, no illusions of forever. Only this moment, fragile, fierce, and fully chosen. "If you die," she whispered, "I will not go back." "I know," he said, and in the mingling of blood and breath, in the heartbeat between silence and fire, a covenant was made. Not for eternity, but for now. And in that now, it was enough. The village sat high in the folds of the Smoky Mountains, where clouds skimmed the treetops and time moved like mist. Slow, quiet, reverent. As Eliza and Wyer emerged from the forest trail, hands still clasped, the first sound she heard was a flute echoing through pine and smoke. Children paused their play. Dogs barked once, then quieted. Women stopped weaving and turned. The stranger was back, and he had not come alone. Wyer walked with a limp, his side still tender, but he carried his head high. Eliza walked beside him, dirt still on her hem, a faded scar on her shoulder, and Wyer's necklace warm against her heart. Whispers followed them like shadows. "White woman, is she his? Why did he bring her here?" They passed a longhouse where elders gathered under a birch awning. At the center stood the firekeeper, an old man whose face bore the lines of many winters. Eliza felt the weight of 100 eyes, but she did not look away. They gave her no words of welcome, but neither did they turn her away. It was enough. Wyer led her to the healer's house. There she cleaned his wound again, boiled roots, and placed the poultice as she had been taught. Women came to the door, some curious, some cold, but one stayed. An old woman with silver hair braided thick, her eyes sharp as carved flint. She said nothing for a long time, just watched Eliza wash, her brow steady as hands, her voice whispering words only he could hear. Finally, the woman turned and left. The next morning, Wyer stood before the council fire where the elders sat in, a wide circle, their faces lined by smoke and age. "I brought her here not to ask," he said, his voice even, "but to show," some murmured. One man frowned, but the firekeeper raised a hand for silence. "If a name must be spoken to make things true," Wyer continued, Then this is my wife, not because a priest said so, not because of law, but because in the moments where life and death stood shoulder to shoulder, she stood with me." He looked over at Eliza. Then his eyes softened, but his voice remained unshaken. "She did not run. She did not break, she stayed. That is more than I have seen in many who were born among us." Silence hung in the air. Then came the soft sound of feet against earth. The old woman with silver hair stepped forward, holding something wrapped in doeskin. She opened it carefully. Inside was a wedding scarf woven from white thread, embroidered with red mountain flowers and fine blue spirals that danced like rivers. She walked to Eliza and placed it gently over her shoulders. "This was mine," the woman said, "and my mother's, and hers before that. I was waiting to see who would stay, not just through fire, but after it." Her voice cracked just slightly. "We do not choose who arrives, only who remains." Tears welled in Eliza's eyes. And as the mountain wind caught the scarf, fluttering its edges around her face, she felt something ancient settle around her shoulders. Not a title, not a role, a name. A name, one she had earned not through blood or birth, but through love, loyalty, and the choice to stand. Spring came gently to the highlands, brushing the treetops with green and setting wildflowers ablaze across the meadow. The village awoke with the season. Children ran barefoot, elders sat longer in the sun, and smoke curled from cookfires as songs returned to the wind. Eliza walked through it all with a basket in her arms and a scarf around her shoulders, the same one given to her by the old woman, now faded with wear and warmth. She had become part of the rhythm. Each morning she gathered with the children, beneath the elm by the stream, drawing letters in the dirt, teaching them to read both their language and hers. She laughed easily now, even when the younger ones teased her accent, or the older ones asked about cities they could not imagine. In turn, she listened, truly listened, as Waya's mother tongue flowed from the mouths of those around her. She learned the words of fire and sky, of love and grief, until they felt like echoes from her own soul. At night she practiced with Waya, her head resting on his chest, repeating phrases between kisses and stories. "Guhi," she said once. He smiled. "You love me," he replied. "I do," she said without needing translation. And then there was the house. Wea had begun building it at the edge of the ridge, where the earth sloped just enough to give them a view of the valley below and the stars above. It rose slowly, logs fitted by hand, stone by stone, until one day Eliza stood at the gate he had carved. 2 names were etched into the wood, not Fairborn, not Blackstone, just Waya and Eliza, side by side, equal, chosen. One morning, as she hung dyed fabric to dry, a rider approached on a dusty horse. He carried a letter with the Fairborn seal. His eyes were curious but not cruel. He had expected a grave or a recluse. He found a woman laughing with a little boy as they drew fish in the dirt. Eliza opened the letter slowly. Her family, under public pressure and private shame, had officially declared her legally separate. No inheritance, no claim, no name. She had been written off the ledger. She read it twice, then handed it back to the messenger. "They no longer hold me," she said softly, "because I no longer need them to." She walked back to the house where Waya waited by the garden plot they'd planted. Together, he looked at her face and knew without asking. Eliza only smiled, stepped into his arms, and pressed her cheek to his. That night, as the fire crackled and the stars stitched silver paths across the sky, she stood outside their home and traced. Her fingers over the carved gate. She did not wear silks or gloves. Her hands were calloused, her nails chipped, her dress simple, her hair unpinned. She had never felt more beautiful. "I once ran from a name," she whispered to the night. "Now I live to carry one." And then, with a tear on her cheek and firelight, dancing in her eyes, she added, "The name of the man who chose me before I ever knew I deserved to be chosen." If this story touched your heart, If you felt the thunder of hooves, the hush of the mountains, and the quiet strength of love chosen not given, then you belong with us. At Wild West Love Stories, we bring you tales not just of romance, but of courage, sacrifice, and the kind of love that crosses borders, bloodlines, and time itself. Subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you never miss a heartbeat from the untamed frontier. Because out here, bullets may miss, but hearts never. The Wild West Love Stories, where the land was wild and love was wilder.